A moment of stillness before we start, not waiting for anything to happen, but just being in the moment now. Make sure you're comfortable in your own skin as you sit there. If you're not comfortable, then just notice that you're not comfortable and allow yourself to not be comfortable, and then you become comfortable. I have a little treat in store. We will talk about, not only talk about, but go into the essence of a book that has been with me, accompanied me for the past 30 years. A book that I've gone back to periodically. I still go back to periodically, pick it up, read a page or two or three, and meditate on it. It's one of the great treasures of spiritual literature. And it is a book that was written in China 2,500 years ago. The Tao Te Ching. Now that's seemingly a huge gulf that separates us from that time period. And yet the book is still vitally alive. And if a book that was written so long ago is still vitally alive, it means it must have been written from a very deep place and point to something that is timeless. If it were not written from a deep, timeless place within the author and did not point to something that is beyond time, a book written 2,500 years ago would be irrelevant, meaningless, incomprehensible. Many books that were written 20 years ago are out of date. Or if you read yesterday's newspaper, it's out of date. So, for something to still be alive now and to be deeply meaningful to many people, there must be something there that is timeless, and that is the essence of the book, and that's what I would like to go into with you. So we are not going into a book. We are not just going to study a book. We are just using the text to go deeply within, to discover something within ourselves. So all that the book is a device that helps us discover ourselves and our connection with the greater whole, the universe, whatever you want to call it. So, just very briefly, the historical context, it might be helpful to know just a little bit about that. This book was written about 2,500, 2,600 years ago in China. That, in other words, 500 to 600 BC. Now that was a very exciting and meaningful time period. Something incredible was happening during those, let's say, 1.5 to 2 centuries for the first time in the history of humanity, as far as we can see, there was a universal wave of spiritual awakening coming over the planet at that time. So the author of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu, is a contemporary, more or less, of the Buddha in India. So the Buddha and his teaching arose at the same time, approximately, as the teaching of Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching. So there was the Buddha arising in India, beginning to teach, and another significant teacher in India whose teaching did not go very much beyond in India even to this day, but has remained very meaningful and profound in India. Mahavira taught at approximately the same time as the Buddha, and it developed into Jainism, the religion, a very beautiful religion still practiced widely in India, based on ahimsa, non-violence, and respect for all living beings. All those things were revelations when they first came into being at the time, the teachings. So we have the Buddha in India, we have Mahavira in India, all arising at the same time. In Persia we have Zoroaster, sometimes called Zarathustra, not to be confused with Nietzsche's Zarathustra, which is a completely different character. Zarathustra, the prophet in Persia. We have at the same time in ancient Greece, and that was a time before the famous Greek philosophers started to teach, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates. It was earlier than that. Those were philosophers that arose for the first time there. They are called pre-Socratic philosophers because they predate Socrates. We only have fragments of their philosophy, but those fragments are enough to show us that their teachings were in some ways, this is how I feel, more profound than the later, more differentiated teachings of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. My favorite pre-Socratic philosophers are Heraclitus and Parmenides, and we only have small fragments, but the fragments show us that those teachings were still in touch with the source of being, the source of life, the oneness that underlies all phenomena. And later, as the philosophy became more differentiated, that was becoming lost. The philosophies became very interesting and much more differentiated, but the connection with the root of all life, the unmanifested oneness, the transcendental dimension, gradually became lost. So those philosophers 500 and 600 BC still had that connection. And they showed people, they also realized that humanity had lost it. So it was part of the wave of awakening that was coming over the planet, the teaching of those philosophers. This is not philosophy as we understand it these days. It's about inner transformation, not speculation. Those were not speculative philosophers in the same way that Buddha wasn't speculative, Mahavira wasn't speculative. So it is a transformational teaching. It's about inner transformation, not about figuring something out with your mind. So we have that arising, the awakening arising in Persia, the awakening arising in India, the awakening arising in ancient Greece. And now we come to China. We have Lao Tzu. His teaching at the same time was arising in China. All part of this wave of awakening that we are now experiencing again, even on a much larger scale now. So we are at a similar time period, except that the wave of awakening that is coming into this world, of spiritual awakening, is on a much larger and more powerful and all-pervasive scale. So we are in the middle of that. 100, 200 years ago, nobody in the West was discussing the Tao Te Ching, and this is why we can go back to it and understand it, because we are awakening. Lao Tzu was, we know very little about his life. He was, they say, in charge of the archives of a kingdom called Shu, and reached, or don't know how old he was when he was becoming bored with the life of the court and the intrigues and the conflicts around him, and so he decided to leave his job and to leave his homeland and just go out into solitude. And the story goes, nobody knows whether it is true, that he left and he got to the border of the kingdom. There was a little border crossing and a gate, and the gatekeeper said, "I'm not going to let you pass unless you write down your wisdom." So he must already have had a certain reputation as a wise man, but he had never written anything. And so all he could do, he said, "Okay, then I'll write it down." We don't know how long it took. He wrote it down, and the gatekeeper let him go, and that is the Tao Te Ching. That is the teaching, and that is the book. And then, according to one story, the last we ever know of him, he was sitting on a water buffalo, riding off into nowhere, and that's the last that anybody ever heard of him. Nobody ever saw him again. That's one version of the story. Another version of the story is that he continued to teach and reached the age of 160 years. The Tao Te Ching is the title of the book, which is not usually translated. People have tried to translate it, but unsuccessfully. Usually they give you subtitles. So it says, Tao Te Ching. One of the traditional subtitles is The Way and Its Virtue. And that's already somewhat of a mistranslation. Although Tao can be translated as the way, you just can't translate Tao. Even if you translate it as way, it's pretty meaningless. And if you're a Chinese person, you're not at a great advantage. You still won't know what Tao is. So you're not at a great advantage. The Tao is something that cannot be named. We'll come to that in a minute. So the subtitle, the way and its virtue. Virtue is a mistranslation of the Te in the Tao Te Ching. Virtue has become a dead word in our language. When did you last say virtue? When did you last use that word? Probably many years ago, if ever. So the word virtue is not alive. What it really refers to is the power. So to translate, it's the power of spirit, of the transcendental dimension. The way and its power is a better subtitle for the Tao Te Ching. The way, how to live. The way to living in alignment with the one power that underlies the universe, the one thing that you cannot name, that is not a thing. Living in alignment with the ultimate, which sometimes is called God, but the moment you call it God, it's not it. You've made it into something. It is not something. It is something that flows through the entire universe, animates the entire universe, and at the same time is beyond it. That is the Tao. And that is something that you can discover within yourself. You can live in a way that connects you with the inner source of all life, of all being. So the way and its power, he is teaching us how to live so that we are in alignment with the power that underlies all life, which, as Lao Tzu says, for lack of a better word, I'll call it the Tao. And the Tao, and that's a good thing, because you can't do much with a word that you cannot exactly see what it means. The same way that Buddha used the word emptiness. You cannot worship emptiness. It's a negative term. It negates form. So it's always been the tendency for humans to worship concepts. The concept of God arises in your mind, and then you start talking about God. The concept of God becomes an idol, because it's no more than a thought. So that you can't do that with the Tao, because you can't picture it, you can't form an image of it, in the same way that you can't form a picture or an image of emptiness. So that is the transcendental reality that the book points to, and it shows us the way to it. So there's great power there. And the book came to me for the first time in my 20s, maybe mid-20s. Somebody said, have a look at this is interesting. And I looked at it, and something drew me into it, but then I couldn't quite, it was so obscure that I knew there was something hiding there in the book. There was some truth hiding, but I couldn't get it. It was there. And then I put it aside, and okay, I have other things to do now. And then years passed, and then in my early 30s, I rediscovered the book in a different translation. There are many translations available. And not only was the translation better, something had by then taken place within me, an awakening, a shift in consciousness. And through that new consciousness, I looked at the book and I said, wow, he's talking, I know what he's talking about. I realized the depth and the profundity of what those words were saying. And since then, the book in different versions, not the actual physical book, but the Tao Te Ching has never left me. It's always been with me in one way, one form or another. So that's the story behind the Tao Te Ching. And now let's see if we can go a little deeper into it. We are going to use, there are two translations that at the moment are my favorites. We will use Stephen Mitchell's translation, fairly recent, Tao Te Ching. Another translation that I've had for a number of years that I'm very fond of is by Jia Fu Feng and Jane English. They together translated the Tao Te Ching, and that's another beautiful translation. I will be using mainly for today Stephen Mitchell's translation or version of it. And the first two lines of the Tao Te Ching are very famous. I've quoted it quite a few times. But even there, sometimes translations differ. The first two lines are, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. What he's saying is, you cannot really speak about the ultimate reality. And whatever you say about it is not it. However, he then continues to talk about it. So how is that? Well, he's telling you not to attach yourself to the words, not to begin to believe in the words or in concepts, not to make it into some new belief. The truth is not in the words. That's what he's saying. The truth, the words only point to the truth. And the truth is only to be found within you, beyond the realm of mind or of thinking or of concepts. So that's just a little, very important, those first two lines. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. Okay, and now let me tell you about it. Because the Tao is in you, and the only place where you can discover it is in you. And so the book shows the way to discover who you are beyond who you thought you are, beyond whatever your mind is telling you who you are. And now,